Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to Why Conversations Go Wrong Through a Metaphysical Lens. Now, the podcast goes through many questions, but the main three questions that I found are as stated. Now, first question is: how do our conversational styles shape our reality and identity? Our conversational styles are impacted by many factors. They reflect how we perceive ourselves and how we want to be seen. These patterns significantly impact how we interpret and respond to other people's messages. Different communication styles can give rise to different interpretations, which may cause miscommunications and arguments. People from different cultures and origins, for instance, could approach, let's say, politeness in a different way. Some could employ it with directness, being direct, while another with indirectness. Differences in gender can also play a major difference, as the way people converse, with women tending to place more emphasis on developing connections, while men do on voicing their opinions. These elements affect our metaphysical discussions and the way we understand conversations. Also, the podcast talks about two people, New Yorkers and Californians. With the New Yorkers, when they talk, they have a smaller gap of pauses, while the Californians have a longer one. So when talk kind of like stops and no one talks, the New Yorkers step in, but the Californians don't get the ground to talk. That's why the author also states in her podcast that when she was analyzing this conversation, it was very hard to see Californians take the ground because of their different pause times. Question number two asks, how does the medium of our communication, the way or the method of communication we take, affects our conversational styles and effectiveness? Well, the answer is simple. It says that the communication medium has a very big influence on our effectiveness and style of communication. The unique qualities of different mediums may help or hurt our conversations. For example, face to face conversations and text to text based communications are very different, as face to face conversations have more of a deeper understanding, while text to text communications tend to have a less, because you can change the conversation and adjust it and requires more explicitness in your conversation. Different media have different feedback timing and immediateness, meaning how well people can respond and how fast they respond, which affects how lively your conversations are. Furthermore, communications stability and accessibility have an impact on how deeply people reflect and respond. We can maximize our communication and promote these positive conversations by adjusting these styles and adapting to the particular media. The podcast discusses how our communication medium might influence the efficiency and style of our conversations. Face to face is highlighted as a medium that makes it possible to interpret and convey meaning, emotion, and attitude through the use of nonverbal cues, basically gestures and facial expressions. But it also calls for being aware of potential disruptions and distractions as well as being responsive and attentive. On the other hand, when we do written communications or text to text communications, such as emails or texts, it provides more flexibility and time to make those messages better and adjustable to the person we're sending them, allowing changes and revisions before we send the message. However, because it lacks those nonverbal signs and cues, it could be more ambiguous and prone to like misinterpretation and misunderstanding. This highlights how the methods of communication can affect our nature of conversation. Now, the last question is, how can we communicate more effectively with people who have very different conversational styles or even minute conversational styles from us? The answer is to communicate more effectively with people who have different conversational styles than us. It's crucial to develop self awareness and being aware of our surroundings and how people are talking and being able to adapt to them. If we are aware of our own conversational styles and are willing to change or adjust our approaches so that we can avoid coming up to conclusions and passing judgments based on our own standards and our own style of conversation, this will cause a miscommunication. It's necessary to actively listen, ask questions, and offer comments and insights in order to ensure the understanding. Patience and flexibility are also essential for understanding a variety of viewpoints. We can also use feedback and clarification to check for understanding and resolve any misunderstandings or misconceptions. Now, the podcast offers helpful tips on how to communicate with people who have different styles. It says about asking them about their style and preferences and kind of using meta communication to grasp the message beneath what they're trying to say instead of taking it at face value. Now, what is the message? Well, in the podcast, Deborah Tennant actually talks about this and talks about how the meta message is basically the message beyond that message. not the message itself, but what they're trying to say. It is suggested to paraphrase and also summarize these conversations in order to demonstrate active listening and verify understanding. The podcast also emphasizes the value of being humorous and having empathy in order to reduce conflict and build closer relationships. We can promote meaningful communications, navigate a variety of conversational styles by using these practices and helping us make better conversations. Now, through that, what is actually the philosophical position of our podcast and of our piece? Well, through a metaphysical perspective, the piece actually answers why conversations go wrong. And it is that people frequently overlook the diversity of how small changes in conversational styles can cause huge misconceptions and differences. And people think that everyone understands everything and that conversations will flow easily, which is a very big misconception and actually is very hard. This leads to the breakdowns of conversations. Now, our conversations are actually very closely to how related we are and who we are as a person. Misunderstandings and conflicts can arise when we fail to recognize the small and subtle differences in people's conversational styles, attitude, body language. They show that the complex connection exists between our language, our perception, and of our shared reality. Now let's move on to what the opposition agrees with and what I agree with. Now, the first argument the opposition makes is that it might not be useful to constantly draw attention to the small differences in our communication, as it may slow down our conversations, and we should put clarity above the complex styles. This could result in more effective and efficient communication. Now, the opposition actually commits the black or white fallacy. Now, how do they commit this fallacy? Well, the opposition limits the available options to two extremes. It implies that there are only two options in this situation. One, either continuously draw attention to the smallest details in our communication, or two, put clarity over complex conversations. However, this oversimplification ignores the possibility of finding a middle ground between both. By presenting this issue as an either or decision, the opposition presents a misleading option that fails to include all viable options that can resolve communication difficulties. My argument is that while clarity is an effective and important part of conversation, it's still crucial to identify both and actually take care of the small variations in our conversations to promote a better understanding and prevent miscommunications. In order to effectively communicate with others and prevent misunderstandings, we must always pay attention to the smallest differences we can see. For example, in order to avoid miscommunication that result from cultural differences, it is essential in cross cultural communication to be aware of those tiny differences that can come from one culture to another in language and nonverbal cues. Intercultural communication research points out the importance of both high context and low context communication styles, where precise understanding depends on these subtle cues. High context communication being their conversational style based on their body language, tone, and overall context, while low context communication suggests the conversations being more direct and straightforward. Now, because of this difference, people have to know both the conversational styles to effectively have better conversations. Knowing the small differences help build closer bonds. For example, in marriages, developing empathy and trust can depend on your ability to spot the small differences in your partner's small in your body language and their tone, as they might not always be direct. Thus, recognizing and seeing and negotiating these subtle differences in communication and build deeper and more meaningful conversations. Opposition argument two states that conversations might not directly shape how we see our reality or define who we are. However, conversations are more about exchanging knowledge and not actually changing our fundamental identities. Now, the type of fallacy the argument commits is the false cause fallacy. Now, the opposition argument states that there's a causal relationship between our conversations and our identity formation by stating that conversations are actually more about exchanging knowledge than actually adjusting our fundamental identities. However, it commits a false cause fallacy by oversimplifying this relationship. The opposition indirectly identifies a one-sided causal relationship, claiming that the main goal of discussions is only knowledge exchange rather than identity development. Despite the fact that conversations can be crucial for both exchange knowledge and actually shaping our identities. The oversimplification ignores the many ways that conversations support various aspects of human development. Argument two states that while conversations are actually good and meaningful when we exchange knowledge, they're also actually crucial to acknowledge that they also have a slight impact on our identity and how we interpret ourselves and how others view us and how we view them. Though conversations are oftenly seen as just people talking, giving them info, you take the info, it's actually not about that, but it's actually impacting our understanding of reality and our personal identity. Research in social psychology shows that the language we use and the conversational styles we adopt and adjust to can indeed shape our perceptions of the world. The Sapir-Whorf hypotheses, for instance, argues that differences in language structures, or linguistic structures can result in various views of reality, and that language affects the mind. People's comprehensions of ideas and experiences can vary when they converse using different linguistic structures. Furthermore, when it comes to personal identities, Irving Goffman's work show that dialogue is essential for the development of our self-identity. Goffman's idea of face, or the socially acceptable identity we show around other people and displayed in social situations, shows how performative behaviors or acting out our face like conversations can shape how people see themselves. All things considered, conversations are actually good for exchanging info, but research also indicates that they are extremely important for forming our identities and our reality perceptions. The words we choose, the conversational styles we adopt, collectively contribute to constructing our reality and our self perceptions. Opposition argument 3 is that attributing the breakdown of conversations solely to a lack of recognizing subtle differences is an oversimplification. There are many factors that contribute to conversation breakdowns. Now, the fallacy the argument commits is the composition fallacy. The argument commits this fallacy by suggesting that attributing conversation breakdowns solely to a lack of recognizing subtle differences is an oversimplification. The fallacy actually comes up when they imply that recognizing the smaller differences is not a significant factor, and that we should leave it apart and actually see the other contributing factors with it. The importance of recognizing the subtle differences shouldn't be dismissed solely because it is not the main factor. They also inherently commit the bandwagon fallacy by saying that there are various factors and that many people follow them, but they don't explain them or show what they are. Argument number 3 is that acknowledging the role of these subtle differences is crucial for fostering effective understanding and minimizing misunderstandings. Attributing conversations breakdown solely to a lack of recognizing subtle difference oversimplifies the issue. However, research in fields like psychology and communication studies demonstrate the important role that these small differences play in our communication. For instance, studies on empathy and emotional intelligence reveal that being open to these nonverbal cues of gestures is essential for understanding others' emotions and their viewpoints. Being ignorant of them will cause to more issues and misconceptions. Moreover, studies looking into how our tone affects message receptions show that minute differences have a bigger impact on how information is understood. These distinctions may be very simple to ignore and leave apart, yet they have a bigger impact on our conversations and why they go wrong. Consequently, even if there are a number of variables that lead to these breakdowns, ignoring the small differences can't be one, as they actually are a bigger part of our conversations going wrong. Philosophers who would disagree with my position is Ludwig Wittgenstein. Now, why would he disagree with my conversations? Well, he believes that communication problems occur when individuals don't follow the actual rules or use language incorrectly. According to Wittgenstein, meaning comes from the context and the way we use our language in the rules of the language games. Now, language games is something he developed where words can be used in different areas. Like, for example, a knife. Now, in a playground, if we say a knife is sharp, that makes sense because we cannot give it to the kids. But if we're in the kitchen, the knife is not sharp because you're using it to cut. Something like that he made up called the language games. However, his argument overlooks how the power dynamics, culture differences, and individual variations can also affect communications. He doesn't fully consider the complexity and diversity that lead to these misunderstandings. Additionally, he downplays the importance of nonverbal cues, like the gestures and emotions, in how we interpret and understand each other. So while his ideas are valuable, it's important to acknowledge that there are limitations and consider the impact of the power dynamics, culture differences, and many more other factors. A philosopher who would actually agree with this is Martin Heidegger. Now, Heidegger emphasizes the interconnectedness between our language, perception, and our actually shared reality. He argues that our understanding of being and the world is shaped by our everyday conversations and interactions. Heidegger would likely agree with my point and view that conversations are closely related to how we understand reality and how conversations are linked to our reality and perception. He would highlight the importance of recognizing the diverse ways in which individuals communicate in order to foster understandings and prevent conflicts. Heidegger actually believed that in order to truly understand something, one has to understand the context of its usage. Something like Wittgenstein said, but in a more broader way, like understanding the meta message or the message behind what someone is saying, highlighting the significance of both practical application and the larger context in which it was used.